What would you do if the very thing you dedicated your life to, the legacy you built with your own hands, was stolen by the people you trusted most? And what if they didn't just steal it, they convinced the world you were the thief? This is the story of how my family tried to bury me and how I used the silence they forced on me to build a truth so loud it would shatter their perfect lies. Before we get into this story about legacy, betrayal, and the most satisfying justice I've ever orchestrated, I need to ask you a favor. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your work taken credit for, hit that like button. It lets me know I'm not alone. And subscribe with notifications on, because what happens next is a masterclass in quiet, patient vengeance. Now, let's get into it. The salt-kissed air of Port Isla used to smell like home. That day, it smelled like betrayal. I stood at the back of the crowd, the rough-hewn timber of the dock rail digging into my palms. Before us, gleaming under the harsh glare of television lights, was the Kestrel, a 45-foot sailing yacht, a vision of sweeping teak decks and a hull so sleek it seemed to move even at rest. Cameras flashed. The small-town mayor droned on into a microphone. My nephew, Julian, stood beside him, looking every bit the visionary genius in a tailored navy blazer, his smile so white it hurt to look at. "As a statement," Julian was saying, his voice oozing a confidence he hadn't earned, "the Kestrel isn't just a boat, she's a statement, a fusion of cutting-edge design and timeless maritime tradition." A statement. The word curdled in my stomach. The only statement here was theft, polished to a high shine. My brother, Alistair, Julian's father, stood just behind his son, a proud hand on his shoulder. His eyes, the same cool gray as mine, scanned the crowd. They passed over me without a flicker of recognition. I was part of the scenery, the aging, forgotten uncle, the town's eccentric boatwright who fixed fishing trawlers and built dinghies. They'd unveiled my life's work, and I was a ghost at the funeral. The design was mine. Every curve, every line, every painstaking calculation. The Kestrel was the culmination of 30 years of obsession. I'd called her Aria. I'd drawn her first lines on a napkin in this very town's pub, the Salty Dog, 20 years ago. The plans had lived in my head on thousands of pages of schematics that filled my cluttered workshop, in the scale models that hung from my ceiling. And now she was their triumph. It started 6 months ago. Alistair, the charismatic face of our family's once modest boatyard, Crow and Sons, had come to me. Financial trouble. The market for custom fishing vessels was drying up. He needed a miracle. "The designs, Elias," he'd said, using my name like a key he rarely needed. "The ones you're always doodling, the fancy ones. Let me see them. Let us build one, a showpiece. It could save us, save the family." The family, the two words that had always been my kryptonite. He knew it. I'd handed over my folios, my notebooks, my soul. I'd worked day and night in the yard alongside them, my hands translating the dreams on paper into the magnificent reality of the Kestrel's bones. Then, 3 months into the build, the pains started, a tightness in my chest, the world swimming. I was diagnosed with a severe, rare arrhythmia. The doctor was blunt. "Stress will kill you, Mr. Crow. You need complete rest, now." The day I came home from the hospital,
Alistar and Julian were waiting in my living room. Their faces were masks of concern. "The yard is too much for you now, Elias," Alistar said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The noise, the pressure, we can't have your health on our conscience." "We'll take it from here, Uncle Eli," Julian added, his tone patronizing. "You just focus on getting better." They'd gently, firmly pushed me out. They'd changed the locks on the design office, citing insurance reasons. They'd hired a team of young engineers from the city, telling them the concepts were theirs, that they were refining the great Alistar and Julian Crow's vision. I'd been too weak, too medicated, too trusting to fight. I believed them. I thought they were protecting me. Standing on that dock, watching Julian drink in the applause, I finally saw the truth. The medicine hadn't been for my benefit. It had been a sedative to keep me docile while they executed their coup.
My illness wasn't a tragedy to them. It was an opportunity. The mayor finished his speech. "And so it is my great honor to christen this magnificent vessel and to congratulate the brilliant minds at Crow and Sons." Alistair stepped forward, beaming. Julian waved. The crowd erupted. I turned away, the sound of champagne corks popping like gunshots at my back. I walked the long way home, through the winding cobblestone streets of Port Isla, the cheers fading behind me, replaced by the mournful cry of gulls. My workshop, a converted boathouse on the less fashionable side of the harbor, was a mess of half-finished projects and the ghosts of ideas. In the center, covered by a dusty canvas tarp, was the last project I'd started before my heart betrayed me. I'd pulled the tarp away. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light. It was a scale model, 1 meter long. A boat, but not the Kestrel. This was something else, something older, wilder, more beautiful. A design I'd never shown anyone. A design I'd always considered too personal, too perfect to ever actually build. I called her the Storm Petrel. I ran my fingers along the model's elegant, fierce lines. The pain in my chest wasn't from my arrhythmia, it was from a heart breaking for the second time. A quiet, cold fury began to burn through the grief. They thought I was finished. They thought they could take my legacy, put their name on it, and leave me to fade away in this dusty workshop. They had my blueprints. They had my boat. But they didn't have my hands. And they didn't have my mind. Alistair and Julian had made one fatal mistake. They assumed my value was in the idea, the design on paper. They forgot that the true magic, the soul of a vessel, isn't drawn. It's built. It's felt in the grain of the wood, the curve of a hull, the silent, perfect balance that only comes from a lifetime of listening to the sea. They'd built a beautiful shell, but I had built the heart, and a boat without a heart is just a waiting wreck. The door to my workshop creaked open. I expected it to be Old Man Hemlock, the fisherman from next door, coming to complain about the noise I wasn't making.
It was my niece, Kiera, Julian's younger sister. At 24, she was the black sheep, quiet, observant, with an artist's soul and a mind for mechanics that far outstripped her brother's posturing. She'd always been different. She used to sneak into my workshop as a kid, not to talk, but to watch me work, her eyes wide with an understanding the others never had. She saw the uncovered model, She saw my face. She saw you at the dock, she said, her voice soft. She didn't offer empty condolences. She just stood there, waiting. "It's beautiful, Uncle Elias," she finally said, nodding at the Storm Petrel model. "Why did you never build her?" "Some things," I said, my voice rough with unshed tears, "are too precious to share." She stepped closer, her eyes not on me, but on the model, tracing its lines with a craftsman's appreciation. "Julian's team, they're good at reading plans, but they don't understand the why. The engine alignment is off by 3 degrees. Dad doesn't want to hear it. He says it's within tolerance." 3 degrees. Enough to cause vibrations at high speed. Enough to strain the drivetrain over time. A tiny flaw my brother's city engineers would dismiss, but one that would forever keep the Kestrel from achieving her true potential. They could copy my lines, but they couldn't copy my instinct. Kiera looked from the model to me, a strange light in her eyes. "They're going to announce it, at the gala, the night before the first race." "Announce what?" "The Crow class," she said, the words laced with a bitterness I'd never heard from her before. "They're patenting the design, putting our name on it, officially, forever." The cold fury in my veins turned to ice. They weren't just stealing a boat. They were stealing my name. They were erasing me from my own story and writing themselves in as the authors. I looked at Kiera, I looked at the model of the Storm Petrel, and in that moment, a new design began to form in my mind. Not a boat, a plan. "The gala," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "When is it?" 3 months, she replied. I nodded slowly, the gears turning. It was impossible, insane. "Kiera," I said, meeting her gaze, "how would you like to learn how a boat is really built?"
The next 3 months were a secret life. By day, I was Elias Crow, the ailing, fading boatwright. I'd take my medication. I'd take slow, careful walks along the shore. I'd occasionally wander past the Crow and Sons yard, leaning on my cane, watching them put the finishing touches on their masterpiece. Alistair would sometimes see me and give a wide, pitying wave. Julian would never even look up. By night, we built. Kiera became my hands, my apprentice, my co-conspirator. We worked in the absolute silence of my boathouse, with blackout fabric hung over the windows. We told no one. We used only cash, buying materials from suppliers in distant towns, telling them we were from a technical college doing a restoration project. The Storm Petrel would not be a copy of the Kestrel. She was her antithesis. Where the Kestrel was designed for luxury and speed, the Petrel was designed for something else entirely: grace, endurance, and a near supernatural connection to the water. She was a purity of purpose they could never comprehend. I taught Kiera everything, not just how to lay a fiberglass seam or steam bend an oak rib, but why. The way the hull shape would capture a current, how the weight distribution would make her ride a storm swell like a bird, not fight it like a barge. We didn't have their resources, their team, their gleaming machine tools. We had hand tools, sweat, and a furious, focused love for the craft. It was the best work of my life. Every splinter, every aching muscle, every late night was a silent rebellion. The arrhythmia was still there, a constant, ticking reminder of my mortality. But now, instead of a death sentence,
It felt like a metronome counting down to the day of reckoning. Kiera was a natural. Her hands were steady, her mind quick. She wasn't just following orders, she was understanding, improving. She suggested a slight modification to the rudder design, an innovation that was pure genius. For the first time since my brother's betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope. The legacy wouldn't die with me. It would live on in her. One night, about 2 months in, we hit a wall. A critical bracket for the keel had been custom fabricated by a foundry that had since gone out of business. We couldn't make it ourselves. We couldn't find a replacement. "It's over," Kiera said, her shoulders slumping in defeat, grease smeared across her cheek. "It's not over," I said, though despair clawed at me. I walked to a rusting old cabinet in the corner of the shop, a thing I hadn't opened in years. Inside were old trophies from my youth, sailing regattas, forgotten mementos, and at the back, a small, heavy box.
I brought it over to our workbench. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bronze bracket, beautifully cast, its surface etched with a subtle, swirling pattern. "It's perfect," Kiera breathed, her eyes wide. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," I said quietly. 30 years ago, for my first real boat design. My father told me it was a waste of time, that nobody would pay for pretty filigree on a functional part. I ran my thumb over the etching. I kept it, a reminder that sometimes the function is in the beauty. We installed the bracket that night. It fit perfectly. It was more than a part. It was a symbol, a piece of my past. My true, unappreciated self was now literally holding together my future. The weeks blurred. The Storm Petrel took shape. She was raw, unpainted, her hull a mosaic of different woods and composites, a patchwork quilt of a boat. But she was strong, she was true, and she was alive in a way the sterile, manufactured Kestrel could never be. The night before the gala, we applied the final coat of a special oil finish to the teak decking. The smell filled the boathouse, rich and organic. We stood back, exhausted, exhilarated. She was ready. Kiera looked at the boat, then at me, her expression a mixture of awe and terror. "What's the plan, Uncle Elias? We sail her up to the gala, and what?" "No," I said, a calm certainty settling over me. "That's what they'd expect. A confrontation, a scene. They'd paint me as the bitter, crazy old man, trying to steal their thunder." I looked at the Petrel. "We're not going to tell them anything. We're going to show them." I handed her a flash drive. On this is every original schematic, every dated napkin sketch, every CAD file I ever made for the Kestrel design. There's also a video I recorded, explaining it all. "What do you want me to do with it?" she asked, clutching the drive like a lifeline. "Nothing, unless I fail." "Fail at what?" I smiled for the first time in months. It felt strange on my face. "At winning." The Crow and Sons Gala was the social event of the season. A massive white tent was erected on the main dock, filled with the glittering lights of chandeliers and the clinking glasses of the elite. The Kestrel was moored just beside it, spotlit, a stunning monument to my family's lie. I didn't go through the front entrance. While Alistair gave his speech inside the tent, boasting about his son's vision, I was down at the old public marina, a quarter-mile away. Kiera was with me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild, dangerous drumbeat. I ignored it. This was the only medicine I needed now.
With Kiera's help, I pushed the Storm Petrel into the dark, glassy water of the harbor. She slipped in without a sound, sitting low and confident in the water. I climbed aboard. The deck felt right beneath my feet. The helm felt like an extension of my own hand. I looked at Kiera on the dock. Remember, no matter what happens. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Go. I turned the key. The electric motor, a silent, powerful system we'd installed instead of a noisy diesel, whirred to life. We slipped away from the dock, a ghost moving through the night. The plan was simple, audacious, and utterly insane. The highlight of the gala was to be the maiden voyage demonstration. Julian would take a select group of investors and journalists on a short, smooth cruise around the harbor to showcase the Kestrel's peerless performance. I was going to join them. I cut the motor 100 yards from the party, letting the Petrel drift silently in the darkness. I could hear the band playing, the murmur of the crowd. I saw Julian, preening in his captain's hat, leading a group toward the Kestrel's gangplank. This was it. As the Kestrel's powerful engines rumbled to life, a deep, throaty sound that vibrated across the water, I started my own motor. I didn't head for the Kestrel. I turned and pointed the Petrel's bow toward the open mouth of the harbor, toward the sea. Then I waited. I saw the Kestrel begin to move, pulling away from the dock with a confident surge. The guests on board were laughing, champagne flutes in hand. Julian was at the helm, playing the part. I pushed the throttle forward.
The Storm Petrel didn't surge. She leapt. She was silent, a blade cutting through the water. There was no roar, only the sound of the hull slicing through the waves and the wind whipping past my ears. I angled myself to cross the Kestrel's wake. A woman on the Kestrel's deck pointed, then another. Heads turned. The laughter died down. They saw the strange, beautiful, unpainted boat keeping pace with them effortlessly, silently. Julian, annoyed at the distraction, glanced over. I saw his expression change from irritation to confusion to dawning, horrified recognition. He knew. He might not have recognized the boat, but he recognized the lines. He recognized the sheer, impossible grace of her movement. He saw the ghost of his own stolen design, but perfected, evolved, alive. He shouted something to his father. Alistair came to the rail, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. This was the moment. The Kestrel, trying to assert its dominance, its engine note deepening as Julian pushed the throttle. But I saw it immediately. The slight, almost imperceptible shudder, Kiera's 3-degree misalignment, the vibration they deemed within tolerance. The Kestrel began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that rattled the champagne glasses on their trays. Guests clutched the rails, their smiles fading into concern. The Storm Petrel felt none of it. She was steady, smooth, a scalpel to the Kestrel's hammer. And then we reached the open sea. The forecast had predicted calm waters, but the sea is a fickle partner. A squall line, unexpected and swift, was moving in. The wind picked up. The waves began to build into sharp, choppy peaks. This was the true test, the test they could never have prepared for. Julian, panicking, tried to turn the Kestrel back toward the harbor. The boat, already straining, wallowed in the trough of a wave. She slammed down hard, her hull groaning under the stress. Water sprayed over the deck.
The investors and journalists were now clutching anything solid, their faces pale with fear. I turned the Petrel into the wind. This is what she was built for. She didn't fight the waves, she rose to meet them. She climbed each swell with an elegant, powerful grace, settling into the trough with a soft, confident sigh. She was dancing where the kestrel was stumbling.
I brought her alongside the larger, now struggling yacht. The contrast was undeniable, a live demonstration for our captive audience. One boat was a fight against the sea, the other was a partnership with it. I looked up at the helm. Julian was wrestling with the wheel, his face a rictus of panic and effort. Alistair was screaming at him, pointing at me, his features twisted in rage. I didn't say a word. I just lifted my hand and pointed, not at them, but at the Storm Petrel's hull just above the waterline. There, carved into the raw, beautiful wood, was my name. Not a brand, not a logo, a signature. Elias Crow. It was the final, silent blow, the artist's mark on his true masterpiece. Then I turned away. I pointed the Storm Petrel back toward Port Isla, and I sailed home. I left them there, in the building storm, in their flawed, stolen boat, surrounded by people who now knew, without a shadow of a doubt, the truth. The real unveiling was over. The aftermath was a quiet implosion. The videos taken by the terrified journalists on the Kestrel went viral in sailing and business circles. Not of the sleek luxury yacht, but of the ghostly, unpainted boat that moved like a dream, and the panic on the faces of the brilliant Crow men. The story wrote itself. Stolen design backfires on aspiring tycoons. The real master builder of Port Isla. Alistair and Julian's world collapsed within days. The patent application for the Crow class was rejected amid the controversy. Investors pulled out, their checks vanishing faster than the morning fog. The bank foreclosed on Crow and Sons to cover their debts. They didn't just lose their business. They lost their reputation, their standing, their narrative. I never said a word to the press. I didn't have to. The Storm Petrel, sitting proudly in my boathouse, now visited by journalists and boat enthusiasts from around the world, said everything that needed to be said. Kira handed the flash drive back to me. I never asked if she'd been tempted to use it. I didn't need to. Her loyalty had been proven in the silence of our build. A week after the gala, Alistair came to my workshop. He looked old, defeated. The bluster was gone.
"You destroyed us," he said, his voice hollow. "No," I replied, not looking up from the hull of the Petrel, which I was now finishing properly. "You did that when you tried to build your legacy on a lie. I just built the truth. It's stronger than you are." He had no answer to that. He stood there for a long moment, a ghost in the doorway of the life he'd tried to steal, and then he left. I heard later that Julian had moved to the city, trying to start over in a business that hadn't heard of his disgrace. Alistair stayed in Port Isla, a diminished man, a cautionary tale whispered about in the Salty Dog.
The kestrel was repossessed and sold at auction for a fraction of her worth. I didn't buy her. I had my boat. They say the best revenge is living well. I think that's only half true. The best revenge is creating well. It's taking the pain, the betrayal, the injustice, and using it as fuel to build something so true, so beautiful, and so undeniably yours that it silences all the lies without you ever having to raise your voice. My brother thought legacy was a name on a patent, a company logo, a story told in a press release. I learned that legacy is the work itself. It's the knowledge in your hands, the integrity in your craft, and the truth you leave behind in the things you build. They tried to steal my name, but they couldn't steal my skill. They tried to erase me, but they only made my final work my most powerful. A storm reveals the flaws in a vessel's design, and sometimes it takes a storm of someone else's making to reveal the true strength of your own. So what do you think? Was I right to let my work speak for itself, or should I have exposed them from the beginning? Have you ever had to prove your worth through your actions instead of your words? Let me know your stories in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of quiet craftsmanship over loud boasts, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about beating the odds your way.